Lux Delacroix knocked the ring from Brenna Aldgate Marsh's hand as if it were nothing. Not by accident, not in passing. She lifted her fingers, touched the small jade band on Brenna's left hand, not the diamond wedding ring, the other one, the one that sat above it, and said, "That's not real jade, is it?" And when Brenna didn't pull away fast enough, Lux's nail caught the band and the ring fell. It struck the marble floor of the Valancourt Grand's preview ballroom with a sound so small that only the people standing closest heard it. But those people included 40 investors, 2 city officials, 6 photographers, and Corvin Marsh, Bressa's husband of 9 years, who stood 3 feet away and watched his wife go down to one knee to retrieve a ring his mother had been calling a flea market trinket for the past 4 years. Brenna's fingers closed around it before anyone could step on it. She did not stand immediately. She stayed still for a moment, with her hand pressed flat against the cold marble, the ring hidden in her palm, and the crystal chandeliers throwing light across every face in the room. Then she rose slowly, the way her grandmother had taught her, spine first, eyes level, nothing rushed. No one offered to help her up. Not Corvin, not Cyrilda Marsh, his mother, who stood near the champagne tower, with a smile that made the satisfaction in her eyes look almost like sympathy. Not Seta, Corvin's younger sister, who had been photographing the whole evening on her phone as if it were content. Not Folktale, Corvin's investment broker, the man who had spent 2 months whispering to developers that the Marsh family held private alignment with the Valancourt Hotel Group. Only Pienne, the venue's senior styling coordinator, looked at Brenna with something honest. She took one step forward before stopping herself, catching the warning in Brenna's eyes. Not yet. Brenna looked at Lux. Lux Delacroix, 32 years old, luxury event consultant and Corvin's companion in the months before this evening became what it had become, smiled back with the brightness of someone who had already decided the room belonged to her. "I just wanted a closer look," Lux said. "I've never seen jade that pale before." Cyrilda lifted her glass in Lux's direction. "Some stones simply don't photograph well, darling." Soft laughter moved through a cluster of guests near the display cases. Brenna looked at Corvin. It was her last honest look. The kind a person gives when they still believe, somewhere beneath everything, that the one they chose remembers who they chose to become. Corvin's jaw was tight. His eyes moved across the room, checking who was watching, calculating the cost of the moment, deciding how much the embarrassment was worth. Then he looked at his wife. "Brenna," he said, low and careful, "don't make tonight about this." That was the answer. Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "She shouldn't have done that." Not even anger on the wrong side. Just the quiet request that she disappear into the background and let the room continue believing whatever lie Folk had been selling all season. Brenna closed her hand around the ring. "I won't," she said. And she didn't. The jade ring had belonged to Brenna's grandfather, Anson Venn, who had come from Hong Kong in 1962 with $20 and a piece of uncut jade wrapped in a handkerchief. He had not come to America with wealth. He had come with the stone and a belief that the things you carry across an ocean tell you what you are willing to protect. He built his first hotel, the original Valancourt, a 12-room inn outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with money borrowed from 3 neighbors and repaid twice over. The jade had been set into a ring for his daughter, Ginevra Venn, the year the second Valancourt property opened. When Ginevra died, 8 years ago, she passed the ring to Brenna with both hands and no instructions. Brenna had understood. The Valancourt Hotel Group, which now held 47 properties across 11 countries and carried a private valuation of $3.5 billion, was held through the Aldgate Trust. The trust had been created during Ginevra's illness at the recommendation of the family's legal team to shield the company from predatory acquisition attempts, public speculation, and the kind of leveraged grief that circled wealthy estates during transitions. On paper, the trust controlled the group. In public, Caspar Veld, 60 years old, former CFO and current acting chairman, managed the company's face. In the locked rooms that mattered, only a small circle knew whose signature moved the house. Brenna had not told Corvin everything when they married. She had told him she came from a hospitality family. She had said the business was complicated and private and still in transition after her mother's death. She had not said $3.5 billion, because at the beginning it would have felt like a test she was administering. And Brenna had not wanted to test him. She had wanted to love him simply, the way people love before money turns every room into a negotiation. The problem was that Corvin had begun the negotiation without her. She had found the first document 6 weeks before the gala inside Folktale's briefcase, which sat open on the dining room table after a late meeting. It was a prospectus. The Valancourt Group letterhead was perfect, The font, the watermark, the crest, all of it. The language inside described the Marsh family as holding preferred investor access to Valancourt's upcoming domestic expansion. One line suggested Corvin Marsh might join the advisory board, pending final trust confirmation. Brenna photographed every page before Falk returned from the restroom. She did not confront Corvin that night. She called Caspar Veld instead. "They're using our letterhead," she said. Caspar's silence was longer than usual. Folktale has been circulating these to private equity contacts for at least 3 weeks. Brenna stood in her kitchen in the dark, holding the phone against her ear. How many people have seen them? Enough that if we don't correct it publicly, the silence will become confirmation. She looked at the ring then, sitting on the counter where she'd left it before dinner. The jade was pale green, almost translucent under the kitchen light, the kind of color that only reveals itself when you hold it towards something bright. "Not yet," she told Caspar. "Let me see how far they're willing to take it." She had gone to the pre-gala fitting against her instinct. Cyrilda had arranged it at a private styling suite in Midtown, not a Valancourt property, because Cyrilda preferred spaces she could fully control. Everything in the room had been chosen for someone else. The gown Pien held up, for Brenna, was ivory and forgettable, chosen to make her blend into the wall behind Corvin, while Lux stood beside him in a copper halter that made her look like someone who expected to be photographed. Seta had laughed over her champagne flute. "Ivry is very modest, which is very you." Brenna had smiled and said nothing. She had been saying nothing in that room for years. When Lux commented on the jade ring, "It looks like something from a market stall, no offense." Brenna only touched it lightly with her thumb and said, "My grandfather brought this stone from Hong Kong in 1962. Lux smiled. "That's sweet." Brenna left without trying on the ivory gown. In the elevator, she sent Caspar a single message: "Event security confirmed for tomorrow?" His reply came before the doors opened. "Valancourt's archive security chief is briefed. All cameras operational." That evening, she opened her jewelry box and found what she already suspected. The ring was there, but the inner band had been bent. Not broken, not yet, just pressed inward at the hinge. Precise, intentional, the kind of bend that holds through a quiet dinner but gives way under a firm pull. She photographed it from 4 angles and sent the images to Vance Arell, 53 years old, her private attorney and the legal trustee who administered her personal estate and controlled the Aldgate voting structure. Vance called within 2 minutes. "This is evidence. Someone put deliberate pressure on that hinge." "I know," Brenna said. "You shouldn't wear it tomorrow." She looked at the ring in her palm, her grandfather's stone, her mother's hands. Her own silence carried across 9 years of a marriage she had tried to protect with the wrong tools. "I'll wear it," she said. She wore it because it was not just a ring. It was the original Valancourt stone, the founding piece of the company's family history, and if someone wanted it broken in public, they had already told her more than they realized. Before she put it on, she photographed the hinge, locked the timestamp, and forwarded everything to Caspar's secure line with one note: "If it breaks tonight, preserve every camera angle." Caspar responded in 2 words, already arranged. At the preview gala, the investors were easy to read. They wanted proximity to something they couldn't quite name. Falk had given it a name: the Valancourt Partnership, the Marsh Access, the private relationship between the group and the family, and they had leaned toward it the way people lean toward warmth in a cold room. Corvin was good at rooms. He always had been. He shook hands cleanly, laughed at the right moments, knew the names of wives and the titles of their husbands. Brenna had loved that about him once. She had loved the way he moved through spaces that intimidated him, as if he had always belonged there. She had helped build that. She had stood behind him in hallways and said, "You belong here," until he believed it. Now he stood near the Valancourt display cases with Lux at his side and Falk just behind, and none of them noticed that every piece in those cases, every handcrafted fixture, every custom door panel, every framed photograph on the wall, belonged to the woman they had just watched go down to one knee on the marble floor. Cyrilda caught a photographer near the Champagne Tower. "The Marsh family has such a meaningful relationship with this property," she said, turning slightly toward the lens. "These kinds of connections take years to build." Caspar watched from across the room. His face was carefully empty. Brenna walked out into the rain 20 minutes after the ring fell. She did not rush. The rain came down straight and cold. She pressed her palm against her chest, with the ring already back on her finger, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. She was not crying then. That would come later, in the private suite, The Aldgate Trust maintained on the 14th floor of the Valancourt Grand itself, a room no one in the Marsh family knew existed. She cried for the marriage she had tried to preserve past the point where it deserved preserving. She cried for every dinner she had sat through while Cyrilda explained to other guests which women understood their position and which women only wished they did. She cried for the version of Corvin she had loved in the early years, the one who had been honest about his hunger instead of hiding it behind her name. She cried because at the gala Corvin had looked at her pain and cared more about the room than about the person inside it. Then she washed her face and called Vance. "Are we ready?" she asked. 5 folders, Vance said. Divorce, claim for intentional destruction of a historically significant private artifact. Corporate investigation into unauthorized use of Valancourt branding and trust assets. Fraud review of Folktale's investor materials. And the grand opening strategy, if you choose it. Brenna looked out at the city below. I choose it. The weeks between the preview gala and the grand opening lived in 2 separate worlds. In one world, Corvin told his network that Brenna was taking time to herself after a difficult evening. He said it with practiced sorrow, the kind men rehearse when they need the room to sympathize before the story changes. Cyrilda told her donor contacts that Brenna had never been suited for public life. Seta posted photographs from the preview night with Lux in the frame and captions about women who move with the room instead of against it. Folk continued circulating the prospectus. 2 more investor groups received updated versions with Corvin's name prominently attached. In the other world, Brenna arrived at Valancourt's corporate offices before sunrise every morning. She sat across from Vance and his evidence folders. She reviewed the gala footage with Idel Carver, 44 years old, the group's head of security and archive preservation. She met with Casper in quiet conference rooms where Corvin's name was spoken with great care and only when necessary. One morning, Pienne arrived through the side entrance with her coat buttoned wrong and her eyes afraid. "It was me," Pienne said. "The anonymous warning before the gala. I'm sorry I didn't use my name." Brenna looked at her steadily. "You warned me." Pienne swallowed. "I should have done more. I saw the prospectus on Falk's table during setup. I noticed the letterhead and I knew something was wrong. And I saw how Lux looked at your ring all evening. I saw her whispering with Seta near the bar." Brenna nodded slowly. "Your statement connects the fraudulent document to what happened that night. That matters." Pienne's eyes moved to the ring. "Will they actually face consequences?" Brenna held the question for a moment. "Yes, but not because I want them to suffer." "Then, why?" "Because if a lie can walk into a room dressed in someone else's name," Brenna said, "then the truth has to arrive with witnesses." The grand opening invitation went out on thick cream cardstock with the Valancourt crest embossed in the corner. The Marsh family received a front-row confirmation. Corvin's assistant sent back an enthusiastic RSVP within the hour. Falk forwarded a photograph of the invitation to 3 separate investor groups with a message that read, "Front row. This confirms the relationship. Move quickly." None of them understood that the seat was not recognition. It was a record. The evening of the grand opening, the Valancourt Grand's ballroom was full of people who understood what the hotel group meant. Collectors, developers, philanthropists, journalists, and international buyers who had tracked the Aldgate Trust's private valuation for years. The room was lit warm and high, the kind of lighting that makes every object look worth more than it is, and every person look like they belong. Corvin, Cyrilda, Seta, and Falk sat 4 rows from the stage. Lux sat beside Corvin in a silver dress. Falk had a folder under his chair. Cyrilda's champagne arrived before anyone had to ask. The opening lots from the Valancourt Anniversary Collection drove the room into careful hunger. Numbers climbed. Casper managed the stage with the authority of a man who had spent 30 years protecting something worth protecting. He did not look at the Marsh family once. Then the lights shifted. Casper returned to the microphone. "The Valancourt Group will now present a restored founding family artifact from the Aldgate collection. This piece is not offered for sale. It will be introduced by Valancourt's controlling owner." Corvin's hand went still on his armrest. He had seen the name Aldgate before. In the trust language he had never fully read, on the legal documents Brenna had kept in a locked drawer. He had told himself it was a holdover from her mother's estate. He had told himself a great many things. Then Brenna walked onto the stage. She wore a dark blue dress, nothing elaborate, nothing designed to announce itself. The jade ring sat on her left hand. The room stood before she reached the microphone. Not because someone signaled them to, but because the people who had bid on Valancourt properties across 11 countries recognized the woman their documentation had always named as the controlling vote, and the recognition moved through the room the way all true things move, quietly, and then all at once. Lux froze. Setta's phone dropped into her lap. Falk looked at the folder beneath his chair, as if calculating how quickly he could leave. Corvin stared at his wife. He had seen her 10,000 times across 9 years. He had never in any of those moments looked closely enough to understand what he was seeing. Casper spoke clearly. Brenna Aldgate Marsh, controlling owner of the Valancourt Hotel Group and sole trustee of the Aldgate family collection. Cyrilda's champagne glass came down on the table without a sound. Brenna did not look at Corvin first. She did not look at Lux or Cyrilda or Falk. She looked at the audience, and she spoke the way her grandmother had taught her, spine first, eyes level, nothing rushed. "This ring," she said, "was made from a stone my grandfather carried from Hong Kong in 1962. He came to this country with that stone and a belief that what you protect tells the world what you value. He built the first Valancourt with money borrowed from 3 neighbors and a handshake, and he repaid both twice over." The screen behind her showed a photograph of Anson Venn, young, standing outside the original Asheville Inn, the jade already on his daughter's hand in the frame beside him. Then a photograph of Ginevra Venn at a property opening 2 decades later. Then the ring itself under magnification, the inner band clearly showing the deliberate pressure applied to its hinge before the preview gala. A gasp moved through the room. "Recently," Brenna continued, her voice unchanged, "this ring was damaged intentionally at a private event, by someone who did not know its history, and, perhaps more importantly, someone who did not know its owner." The gala footage appeared on the main screen. Lux's hand reaching, the ring falling, Corvin standing still. Lux stood abruptly from her seat. 2 security officers stepped into the aisle before she reached it. They did not touch her. They didn't need to. Every camera in the room already had what it needed. Vance stepped forward from the side of the stage. His voice was unbothered, level, the voice of a man who had prepared this moment down to its last syllable. "For the record, the Valancourt Hotel Group has not authorized any Marsh family partnership, advisory board appointment, investor access agreement, or representation mandate of any kind. The group has initiated legal review into unauthorized use of its branding, name, and trust assets across investor communications dating back 8 weeks. All materials circulated by Folktale referencing Marsh Family Authority are void effective immediately. All negotiations conducted under that purported authority are terminated." Falk sat very still. Behind him, the investors he had been courting leaned together, began speaking in low voices, pulling out phones, texting people who were not in this room. Corvin rose from his seat. Security blocked the aisle. For the first time all evening, Brenna looked directly at him. Her expression was not anger. It was something quieter and harder to come back from, the face of someone who has finally stopped making room. "I didn't come here to take something from you," she said. "I came here to stop giving you things you didn't earn." The words carried across the ballroom the way her grandfather's belief had carried across an ocean. Corvin looked at the ring on her hand, at the screen behind her, at the room standing around his wife, and the company he had borrowed like a coat he intended to keep. He looked at all of it, and then he sat back down. The charity lot opened in honor of the Aldgate collection. The proceeds would fund a hospitality training program for women rebuilding after financial displacement, a program that had lived in the Aldgate Trust's operating documents for 3 years, waiting for a public moment to name it out loud. The first paddle went up before Casper finished the sentence, then a second, then 12. The number passed 1 million before the room settled, then moved past 3 without slowing. Brenna watched from the stage. She did not smile broadly. She only pressed her thumb against the jade ring and thought about a handkerchief crossing the Pacific, about her grandfather believing, against every reasonable argument, that the things you carry tell the world what you value, about her mother fastening the ring onto her hand in a hospital room and not needing to explain why. In the corridor outside the ballroom, Corvin caught up to her. He had always been good at the last word, at the pivot, at finding the framing that made him look like the reasonable party. She had watched him do it across 9 years in rooms she had quietly opened for him. "You should have told me," he said, "from the beginning. If I had known." "You knew," Brenna said. "You knew I came from this company. You knew the trust existed. You chose not to ask, because not knowing was more convenient than knowing and still doing what you did." Something moved across Corvin's face, several things in quick succession before landing on the calculation she recognized as his last resort. The group could benefit from my network. We could restructure this. Aldgate and Marsh, formally, legally. No. The word was not loud. It didn't need to be. Vance appeared at the end of the corridor. Beside him stood a process server, holding a sealed envelope, standing very still. Corvin looked at it. The server stepped forward. Mr. Marsh. He placed the envelope into Corvin's hands. Divorce petition, Vance said, along with civil preservation notices and a separate legal hold covering all Marsh-affiliated communications involving Valancourt assets. Corvin looked at Brenna with the face of someone who had just discovered the floor was lower than expected. For a brief moment, she saw the man she had believed in, the one who had stood in front of cheap mirrors before investor dinners and told her honestly that he didn't feel like he belonged in rooms like those. She had stepped behind him then and fixed his collar and told him he did. She had meant it. You lost this, she said quietly, long before tonight. Tonight only made you understand it. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Behind her she heard Lux's voice, tight and searching. Corvin, do something. She didn't hear his answer. She didn't need to. Some questions answer themselves the moment no one moves. Before sunrise, Brenna returned to the Valancourt corporate archive. The jade ring was placed inside a glass case beneath the founding photograph. Anson Venn, standing outside the first property with the stone in his hand, looking at the camera like a man who had already decided to trust what he was building. Casper stood beside her in the quiet. Will you stay visible now? Brenna looked at the ring under the glass, at her grandfather's face, at everything that had survived, because someone chose to carry it forward, instead of setting it down to make the room feel lighter. Yes, she said, not because they broke something, because I am done hiding what survived. 3 weeks later, Amari Osi, 23 years old, and a first-generation hospitality trainee in the Aldgate Foundation's inaugural cohort, received her acceptance letter with both hands and read it twice in the Foundation's lobby. She had applied on the last day before the deadline. She had almost not applied at all. When she looked up, Brenna was crossing the lobby on her way to a board meeting, jade ring on her left hand, moving at the pace of someone who no longer has anything to prove. Amari said, "Thank you." Brenna paused. She looked at the letter in the young woman's hands, then at her face, careful, hopeful, braced for something to be taken back. "Don't thank me," Brenna said. "Build something your grandfather would carry across an ocean for." Then she walked into the meeting, and the jade ring caught the morning light through the lobby windows and held it.